Well, good morning. If I could ask everyone to please find their seats, put their phones on quiet mode, and welcome everyone to the campus of George Washington University, especially on a beautiful day in the middle of July on a Friday morning. So this is pretty awesome you're all here today. So thank you. But you're in for a real treat. I like to say our events try to shed more light than heat on topics. Given the topic we're talking about today, I think the energy sector sheds both light and heat, but we'll try to keep it focused on issues that really matter. And the truth is when you talk about critical infrastructure, I don't think there is an infrastructure more critical than not only the energy sector, but the utilities and the grid in particular. I also think there's a lot of misinformation, so one of the things that I hope to be able to do here is provide a backdrop in terms of what the community is addressing from a private sector perspective, but also the government engagement and role in enhancing both the security and the resilience of the sector. I want to tip my hat to Brian Harrell in particular, one of our senior fellows. This was his idea, and he's been one of our champions on a whole host of issues, but he said, dude, we haven't had an event on the grid in a while, and I said, you know what, you're right, and thanks to him for the energy, no pun intended, to make this happen. He's also, since he came up with that idea, taken a job in the private sector, now at Duke Energy. But very briefly, I'm going to introduce our panelists, because you really can't ask for more of an all-star panel than we have assembled here today. We'll start with Jeanette Manfra, who I think everyone knows is the Assistant Secretary at DHS for CS&C, Cybersecurity and Communications. Obviously, DHS plays a critical role in all of our critical infrastructure, systemic risk and the like. Pat Hoffman, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Energy, and as we all know, DOE also plays a major role in ensuring the grid and critical infrastructure writ large, and I think taking on a more significant role of late. Then I mentioned Brian Harrell, who's now the Managing Director of Enterprise Protective Services at Duke Energy. And prior to that, he served in the U.S. Marine Corps, so thank you for that, hoorah, and is also one of our senior fellows. Following Brian, we've got Joe Sagona, who's the Senior Director for Cybersecurity at PG&E. He's been at cyber and IT risk for a number of years, and thank you, Joe, for joining us. Then we've got Chris Peters, who's the Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Entergy. And obviously, Entergy is one of the biggest players in the space and doing yeoman's work around the utilities in particular. And then finally, last but certainly not least, normally he's first with an AA. I'm sure you get Scott Aaronson. I'm sure every time they call out names in class, he can never miss. He can never be a minute late because he's going to be the first name called. But we've got Scott Aaronson, who is Vice President of Security and Preparedness at Edison Electric Institute. And Scott's, dare I say, also on my board. So I have to listen to what Scott says. But truth is I've always benefited from his insights and counsel on a whole range of issues. So without further ado, we're going to make this as conversational as we can, and I want to ensure that we have a lot of time for audience participation and Q&A. I mean, Jeanette, why don't I start with you and then Pat, and sort of to give a sense of where you think things stand within the government, a little bit, I think, on the cyber strategy writ large, but then zeroing in specifically on the grid. And Pat, I'd be very curious where DOE is coming down on some of these issues. So, please.
Sure, and also thank you for holding this event. There we go. Usually when I'm on a panel, it's to get yelled at by senators. But appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all about the work that we're doing, critical infrastructure generally, and then energy in particular. A few weeks ago, we released the DHS Cybersecurity Strategy. This is the first cybersecurity strategy that we have had. We've had other documents that sort of laid out the visions and concepts, but this is really the first one where we laid out what our priorities are and what specific activities we're going to do to implement them. We're currently working on the implementation part of that. But what we're focusing on is kind of 5 pillars of effort. And I'll talk broadly about what DHS is doing and let Pat kind of fill in specific to the work around the energy sector. So fundamentally, DHS is a risk management organization, in particular National Protection and Programs Directorate, which hopefully Congress will change our name soon to the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. But our organization is really responsible for managing critical infrastructure and cybersecurity risk. Now, we obviously don't manage all of that risk by ourselves. It's a national effort, but we believe our role is to understand what that risk is and to look at the different tools that are available to the government, private sector, state and locals to figure out how do we best reduce that risk and where do we prioritize. So that's really what the strategy focuses on is first, we need to identify the risk. This seems rather obvious, but what we're trying to do is take a big step backwards. We've done a lot of work in each of the sectors, done some work across sectors, and we've done work in individual organizations. But what we believe that we need to do is understand what national risk looks like. And what we're thinking about is what we're calling national critical functions. What are those functions and services that are so critical to our country that if an adversary purposefully or if through an all hazard sort of a disaster situation, those are disrupted and would cause very significant impact to our citizens and residents. So thinking about things like a stable financial system, a grid that we can depend upon, communications that we can depend upon. And so starting with that exercise, identifying what those functions are, and then thinking about who are the stakeholders involved in delivering those functions and services. And it's not always obvious, and it requires us to, particularly when you're talking about cybersecurity risk, but not just for cyber risk, but you have to really think a bit cross-sector. There's multiple entities that are involved in delivering these critical functions and services. It's not just the end users on the critical infrastructure owner and operator. Particularly when you're thinking about cyber, you have to think about the vendors who make the control systems. You have to think about the software developers. You have to think about the manufacturing of the different components. And you have to think about that holistically. So we identify who those stakeholders are in delivering that service and function. And then we start to think about how could that chain of delivery of those service or function be disrupted, whether through, like I said, whether through an adversary or through just a disaster. And as we go through that process, particularly from my perspective, and especially focus on adversary disruption of those services or functions, what indicators and warnings can we put in place so that the government is positioning itself, whether that's the intelligence community or other parts of the government, like my own organization, that have the ability or energy, that have the ability to sense what's going on, whether that's through the deployment of technical sensors or through information sharing partnerships. What are those actual indicators and warnings? I'll pick on the financial sector since they're not here, but to think about what does it mean to actually be able to have a wholesale payment system that works? These are the high-value payments that are cleared every day, trillions of dollars that our banks in the United States clear on behalf of the global market. What does it mean to ensure that that system is stable? And what would it mean to have indicators and warnings amongst the private sector and within the government, and then being able to share those so that we can alert and warn, and that we're looking out for not just whether an adversary is spearphishing JP Morgan, they know that's happening, they're protecting against that, but is an adversary looking to disrupt a particular kind of niche software that people use. So those are that's a level of detail, and we really think that that is what we need to do to change the information sharing conversation, because that's the type of information that will really help defenders prevent. Now, then we also know we're not going to be able to prevent everything. So how do we organize ourselves to be able to respond and recover and mitigate consequences before they become significant? So that means that we have to take the National Cyber Incident Response Plan and start to operationalize that. Do electric companies know what to expect from DHS? Do you call on the National Guard? Do you call on FEMA? What are all of these constructs that we've developed for emergency management doctrine that are well understood and well in place? We need to figure out how that works for cyber. And what are those? Are there barriers? Are there legal barriers? Are there policy barriers? Are there logistics barriers to being able to respond to a significant cyber incident? What are those contingency plans that we need to have in place in order to ensure that not only do we have those expectations, but we actually have the sort of the logistics and everything in place so that we can quickly mitigate those consequences. That's a very complicated thing to do. But we need to be able to have that conversation at the same time that we're sort of figuring out the prevention side. The very last pillar is thinking about, while we're in a situation right now and we're figuring out how to prevent disruption of what we have right now and be able to respond and recover, we need to also be thinking long term. How do we develop a stronger, safer, and more secure ecosystem? And how do we enable this broader ecosystem to be more capable? And so for us, a key part of that, standards, thinking about the development of international standards, industry-driven standards for things like IoT devices, thinking about workforce. Workforce is a very large priority for us. Somebody told me we have a bunch of scholarship for service folks in here. I don't know if you want to raise your hand.
Got a few.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's really awesome.
That's awesome.
Very excited because a lot of people don't know about this program, unfortunately, but this is a great feeder program, and us and the NSA and the National Science Foundation have been working for years, certifying academic institutions to be cyber centers of excellence and then building curriculum. We've built curriculum for K through 12. We've got millions of students now using this, but we need to do more. We need to be figuring out non-traditional ways to get kids excited about this space. We need to identify engineers that may be pursuing a software development track and maybe encourage them to go to the security side. We need to be thinking about process control and how do we, the very niche space of control systems, how do we develop a workforce that understands how those work and understands how to secure those? And then we just generally need to think about a broader workforce about that. Currently, particularly in the control systems community, they understand safety, but do they understand how security and the security of those systems can impact the safety? And so building that security culture among our general workforce in addition to trying to close the gap on our cyber workforce. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about very broadly, and I will turn it over to Pat to talk about.
Thank you, Jeanette. That's great context. And Pat, maybe to drill down into the particular sector, and I mean, the truth is DOE is putting their money where their mouth is now, so there's been a lot of activity in the past year.
But I will tell you first, I am very happy when Jeanette picks on any other sector besides the electric sector. So one of the things that I'm hoping you will hear today and you will see from some of the conversations and the activities we're working on is that this industry and the department is really being forward-leaning. And we want to be one of Jeanette's happier customers with respect to being able to try different things out, prove out different principles, try things in the cybersecurity space, make sure that we're staying ahead of the game. So we did well, number one, we formed a new office, which is cybersecurity, energy security, and energy delivery, something like that.
Caesar.
Cybersecurity, energy security, and emergency response. I'll get there. It's a long name. And so with that, we're going to focus all of our security and emergency response activities together. But in that, we formed a roadmap, and we have several strategies that we are looking at that folds very nicely into what DHS has put forth in the cyber strategy. First pillar and things that we're looking at is situational awareness, which talks about how do we continue to look at the visibility in the sector, how do we really understand where the threats are, how do we prioritize within the sector, but not only is it looking at OT and IT systems, but it's also looking at the supply chain and the interdependencies and thinking about that from a holistic view. Once again, looking at the risks, starting to help prioritize where some of the focus areas. The second area is actually just the planning and incident response. So how do we respond to an incident? How do we really look at accelerating the time to figure out what is going on? Once again, as we look at the analogy from a hurricane point of view, we really want to be able to shorten that assessment time period. We really want to be able to drill down and find out quickly what's happening on the system and how we can respond. So some of the tools and some of the things that we're looking at is what do we need to develop from that perspective to help from a situational awareness. So how do you look at abnormal behavior on the system? How do you look at different capabilities that can help with the identification? The third area is, of course, the partnership with the industry, with the federal and state government and the local levels of really just bringing the whole community together, utilizing ways to be able to say, here's the capabilities that we have. One of the highest priorities is continual coordination with the Electric Sector Coordinating Council, the Oil and Gas Coordinating Council. It's continuing that close partnership with industry so we can continue to really be unified in our message and our approach as we look at cybersecurity and emergency response activities. So we're very strongly focused on how we can work together. As we all know, cybersecurity requires everybody's engagement, and so we want to make sure that not only do we have the supply chain community there, but we also have the industry at the table. So some of the things we're looking at is how do we create a partnership with the supply chain community and the industry to really look at components and devices and really start shoring up protections and strategies around that. The next area is leveraging our R&D at the national laboratories. We want to really stay ahead of the game, looking for innovative solutions. We've had multiple solicitations out there. We had a $25 million industry solicitation that we had recently released, I think back in April, that really looking at solution sets for how do we protect the control system environment, but how do we really support industry in building capabilities. Where the department is focusing on is supporting industry and helping build capabilities within industry to advance their cyber maturity, to advance their ability to understand, detect, respond, and recover from an event that occurs on the system. And then the last area is where we can, we're going to try and help with the workforce development. As Jeanette mentioned, it is a huge opportunity that we need to take advantage of building that workforce. So we are doing just a couple OT, cyber-related kind of competitions, cyber competitions, just as our contribution to continuing to develop the STEM areas, but also develop the workforce development. So we're trying to really dive down hard and really think about how this industry can continue to show leadership in understanding what's happening in the cyber landscape, but how to mitigate and respond to events.
Awesome, thank you, Pat. And Matt and Brian, maybe let Scott sort of kick it off just because of the EEI's bird's eye view, and then go down the line from there. So, I mean, everyone talks about public-private partnerships, but I mean, we got to move beyond the nouns into the verbs, and I think that there's a lot of there's a lot going on in that space. But I also think when we talk about, everyone knows the interdependency the grid has to other sectors, but I think the grid is also dependent upon other sectors fulfilling their obligations too. So maybe Scott sort of give that bird's eye view, and then we'll go to Brian and see what some of the best practices are in companies.
Sounds good. Sure. Thanks, Frank. I was planning to bat cleanup here, but I'll go first and sort of I'll set the table instead. What's interesting is I'm really glad to go after Jeanette and Pat, who obviously the industry works really closely with, and echo just about everything they said. So I won't be redundant. I'm actually going to look at, I know we're sitting here at the Center for Cyber and Homeland Security, but I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm going to talk about storms. Why am I going to talk about storms? First of all, you heard the words all hazards a couple of seconds ago. It is. We cannot protect everything from everything all of the time. And some of the things that we are doing as a sector to protect against and prepare for something that we've had to do for the better part of the last century is storms, and sort of seeing how that experience in preparing for and then ultimately having to respond to, because there's no geopolitical diplomacy deterrent strategy to stop storms from hitting our shores. And frankly, I think something could be said similarly for what's going on with cyber and physical attacks that are facing some of the nation's most critical infrastructure. To pull a thread on something Jeanette said, and then also that Frank just teed up, yeah, we are the most critical sector, got it. Everybody relies on us. We don't have water, we can't generate steam or cool our system. We don't have telecommunications, we can't operate. We don't have transportation or pipeline, we can't move our fuel. We don't have financial services, we don't have access to capital markets, we can't trade our product. There are a lot of ways to impact the energy grid short of attacking the energy grid. And then, also Pat and Jeanette both talked about supply chain a little bit. There are a lot of ways to influence our ability to operate by impacting our supply chain, either nefariously or simply denying us access to fuel, for example. So let's talk about storms for a second. I've been quoting my father a lot lately, and he's very proud of that. When I was growing up, he told me, and this is true, so when I was growing up, he told me, he said, son, you've got two choices. You can be a role model, or you can be a cautionary tale. I'll let you guys decide what I became. But let's talk about the role model. So last year, 2017, an absolutely historic hurricane season. Harvey, 36 hours of notice, was sitting there off the Gulf Coast, had, like I said, 36 hours of notice. Category 4 storm hits the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States, hangs out over it for about 4 days, drops 50 plus inches of rain. At its height, we lost 350,000 customers without power. That's extraordinary resilience. I'm going to talk about resilience in a second. You look at Irma. It was truly a historic storm, and we don't just use that word because it's a fun word to throw out there. It was the first storm to ever put hurricane force winds in all 67 counties in Florida. Went right up the spine, Cat 4, left pretty quickly, but at its height, 8 million customers without power. Now, my favorite story about that is not long after the storm, I was talking to a reporter who said one of the companies down there had spent $3 billion over the last 10 years in storm hardening, and yet they still lost 8 million customers. Wasn't that a waste of money? No, and let me explain why. That storm, Irma, very similar to Hurricane Wilma from about 11 years before that. Wilma took 13 days to recover. Irma took 5. The investments in resilience, in storm hardening, in not stopping the storm, can't do that, but in being prepared to respond and recover as quickly and effectively as the companies down in Florida did is extraordinary. There's your role models, right? And then we can look at Hurricane Maria and what happened in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this is not to throw either of those entities under the bus. They had a historic storm as well. And Maria was absolutely devastating. I've had the opportunity to be down in Puerto Rico an awful lot. And one of the things that we gleaned from that is because of the state of the preparedness in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and because of the magnitude of the storm, the ability to respond and recover was hampered. And we could sit here and talk for 3 hours about what went well and what didn't and what we've learned from that. I'm not going to go there, but simply to say, you can see where investments in resilience and preparedness showed great dividends, and where there are places where we can be doing better in order to be better prepared to respond and recover. So I've used that word resilience a couple of times. It's this favorite buzzword around DC, and I think we've got probably about 125 people in the room here. If I asked each one of you for a definition of resilience, I'd probably get about 175 answers. So let me make it 176. So here's the way that we are thinking about resilience. This sector, as I think a lot of you know, have a mandate for reliability. We have reliability standards, we have metrics that we have to abide by and live up to. We are making investments in order to ensure that we are reliable. Reliability is the ability to maintain operations in blue skies. And we do that very, very well. And better every year, and we have, like I said, we have mandatory enforceable standards that require that we do that. Resilience, to me, and again, Scott's definition, y'all can have your own, but resilience to me is the ability to operate when you take a hit in the mouth. I've been quoting Eisenhower a lot, and then I've been quoting Mike Tyson a lot, and you're gonna wonder how I'm gonna put those two together, aren't you? So Eisenhower said, plans are useless, planning is everything. And then Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So I think what we can learn from both of those esteemed philosophers is that there is an awful lot that we can be doing to anticipate that punch in the mouth, understand that when it happens, there are things that we can be doing today that will ensure that we can be quicker to respond. So it is that point that, again, Jeanette and Pat made, can't protect everything from everything all the time. We have to look at the threats to our most critical infrastructure holistically. It is about an all hazards approach. I just talked for 3 or 4 minutes about storms, but a lot of those things that I just said, our ability to respond and recover, our ability to anticipate, the sharing of information, the protection of our supply chain, are all things that apply not just to acts of God, but to acts of war as well. And so looking not just at the natural disasters, but at the malicious attacks in a similar way, building off of the experience we have as a sector and and in our partnership with the government, with federal government, with state and local operators, to be able to be as responsive to all of the things that we need to be prepared for as owners and operators of the nation's most critical infrastructure. We understand this isn't just about business. This is about the life, health, and safety of our customers. This is about national and economic security. We live and work in the communities that we serve. We are very patriotic. You're going to hear that from the next 3 gentlemen. This is our obligation as owners and operators of critical infrastructure for the benefit of the United States, and it's something we take very seriously. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott, and you teed that up just right. I mean, I want to hear from from Brian, Chris, and Joe specifically on what some of these investments are yielding, and I think the dividends that Scott was just talking about. So, Brian.
Yeah, so as Jeanette, Pat, and Scott just mentioned, want to hear me anymore.
There you go.
So as they just mentioned, as the largest utility in the world, I will point to the fact that we are spending as an industry billions of dollars on physical security, cybersecurity, resilience. And Duke, we fully recognize that we are a high value target for anyone who wants to do anything nefarious to critical infrastructure. We understand that. We are in the process of investing, millions and millions of dollars. Just as a pure example, SIP-14, based off of the Metcalf attack a couple years at Pacific Gas and Electric, just over the last year and a half, we have spent $200 million on the physical security upgrades for many of our substations. That is significant dollars. So let me stop there and just kind of give just a bit of a background on Duke Energy. 29,000 employees. We service 7.6 million people across 6 operating states in the Carolinas, the Midwest, and Florida. We service over 50,000 megawatts of generation, including nuclear, coal fire, oil and natural gas, and hydroelectric, 300,000 miles of transmission and distribution line. That's the equivalent of between here and the moon. It is a significant machine that everyone up here is representing. I think you've heard probably the quote before that the electric grid is the largest machine in the world, and it absolutely is. Under a previous life, I worked for a number of years at NERC, and I could tell you that every single night I went to sleep peacefully that night, knowing that the grid is redundant, it is resilient, and are we a potential attack away? The answer is yes, but I think we have a number of precautions and security things in place that will help mitigate such attacks. So within the corporate security function at Duke Energy, we have about 457 people, which is a very large security organization operating across our footprint. We have people in the field when gunshots go off at a substation, when somebody is trying to VPN to our network that is unauthorized. We have people that are on top of that most rickety tick. As far as our organization goes, we're doing generation, transmission, distribution of electric power, aviation, gas, executive protection. We are doing everything that is involved with NERC SIP, CFATs at DHS, the MTSA. So in addition to trying to keep the lights on, we have all of these regulatory things that are happening around us. And I think before I came to Duke, I didn't necessarily have the appreciation for what exactly that means. I am consumed 24 hours a day with bad people trying to attack my system. And oh, by the way, I now also have this regulatory stuff that I have to do. It is very labor intensive, and I'll be the first one to admit that. Fortunately, we have a lot of good people, really smart people that are attacking the regulatory issues. We want to stay out of trouble. We see the value in how a rising tide lifts all boats. We understand that, and we think it's a good thing. What are we investing in, to Frank's question? First and foremost, millions and millions of dollars into our cyber defenses. I will tell you, in 2017, we had over 650 million attempts at intruding into our system. You didn't see us on the news. That is significant. That is significant. The fact that we have this stat means that we are focused on it. We're looking at it. We're monitoring it. We're penetrating our own system to ensure that we are moving the envelope. We're red teaming. We're trying to find the vulnerabilities before anyone else does. And I think that is the sign of a very mature program. We are trying to go down that road. We're not there yet. Let me make sure I'm not painting the wrong picture. We have a lot of work to do. We are working with our partners here at DHS, DOE, the FBI, some of the other agencies that are out there that aren't on this panel. But we are in constant contact with our federal partners. I mean, just yesterday I'm having a 6-hour conversation with the FBI about somebody trying to penetrate our system. You know, these are the kinds of things that are happening on a day in and day out basis. Data loss prevention. This is a big deal for Duke. You know, the last thing we want is somebody is going to resign, and before they resign and walk out the door, they're downloading these giant terabytes of information out of our system because they want to use it one day at their new employer. That's one silly example, but many other examples are somebody's trying to do something nefarious with it. Somebody's trying to pass this information to a competitor. Somebody's trying to pass this information outside of our network to do something bad with it. We understand that we have people with institutional knowledge as to how to bring us to our knees. We have those insiders. We know, we're cognizant of it, and so we're trying to monitor that day in and day out. Our insider threat program is pretty significant as far as an investment goes. Just this year, we've invested over $1 million just in this particular program to try and create the governance, to try and figure out what are the tools that we need to monitor those 29,000 people that are working for us. We view the insider threat on the same level as somebody who's trying to shoot our infrastructure or somebody who's trying to penetrate our cyber systems. SIP 14, I mentioned a little bit about this. Back in 2013 was, a major knee-jerk reaction, I think, for the industry. Within 90 days, FERC said to NERC, you will go out and create these mandatory physical security standards. And the industry, within 90 days, responded, which is lightning quick. And I think that's important to remember. I don't think, as Scott kind of mentioned, I don't think we can get everyone in this room to agree on anything, much less an entire industry with competing priorities, right? And so we did that. And so now I mentioned the $200 million figure. However, not a SIP 14 site, but just this week we had somebody jump over one of our substations, over the perimeter fencing. And the question that came back to me was, how could somebody penetrate your $1.2 million fence? And I said, that fence is one layer in a multitude of layers, that onion factor, right? The intrusion detection systems worked. The cameras worked. The fact that they were delayed and we knew that they were there and local law enforcement responded worked. So we are very happy with the technology, but I want to paint the picture that there is not one silver bullet that is going to protect all of us at all times, as Scott kind of alluded to. And lastly, resilience. Resilience, as Scott mentioned, is kind of the name of the game, so to speak, at Duke. I mentioned some of our key infrastructure. We are working to remove some of that key infrastructure from some of these compliance lists. Not because we don't think compliance is important, but because we don't want our infrastructure, our one piece of infrastructure, to be so critical that if we lost it, it would cascade into other things, or reduce us to rubble, so to speak, right? We want to have redundancy built into our system to where if we lose something, we simply have the ability to reroute power without issue. Some of the struggles that I think that we are facing, I'll be kind of Duke specific, but I know that the rest of the industry is facing it as well. And that is this idea that I think industry recognizes the fact that bad things are going to happen. And it's not if, it is in fact when. And so I think we need to wrap our heads around the fact that somebody is going to hurt us in the middle of the night, and we need to be responsive and have the ability to respond and recover from that. Let us not build our crisis response plans in the midst of crisis. So having these relationships now with our federal partners is absolutely critical. And I think for the longest time, at Duke in particular, we were very focused inward. We didn't necessarily flip the model on its face and say, okay, how do we engage those around us? Within the last 2 weeks, we've had meetings with the Bank of America, with NASCAR, with Wells Fargo, with JP Morgan Chase. These are the big corporate entities down in Charlotte, as an example, that we're trying to engage. We recognize that some of the data threat streams that they get may be different than what the electricity ISAC is pushing our way, than what our local FBI office is pushing our way. So data is king. I want all of this information. I want to be able to determine what is important to me. And I think we're knowledgeable enough, we're smart enough to kind of sift through some of the white noise that's out there, take away the real nuggets of gold, and actually do something about it. I think we're in a position, at least the three of us from the utilities up here, we're in a position to where once we get information from DHS or DOE, we have the ability to impact change. We can do this within our organization. Now, Duke is a United States Navy aircraft carrier. It is difficult to turn. It is difficult to move. It can be slow at times. But at the same time, we can also be very agile when we see the threat has materialized in front of our face and we need to do something about it.
That would be a Marine focusing on the aircraft.
And then information sharing.
Tank too.
Pat hit that nail on the head. This is important for us now. I think not having enough clearances within industry remains an issue. Not being able to have the conversation. And I'll be frank, I don't care what the methods and the resources and the source in which you got that information. I don't care. But I do care about your opinion on how to mitigate. I have my own. But also, what is the threat that I need to be looking at? And what is your crystal ball right now that I can look at 2 months from now, 2 years from now, 20 years from now? My budget needs to be looking at 19, 20, and 21 as emerging threats. Drones are a part of that, as an example. So these are some of the things that we're constantly struggling with up here. And lastly, just a pitch, or at least a kudos to the electricity ISAC. I don't think they're in the room, but we're a big proponent of the ISAC. We understand the value that they bring to the table. We want to utilize them. They are our conduit, so to speak, between private industry and the federal government, and we should be leaning on them early and often. And I'm going to stop there.
Brian, thank you. And you pulled so many threads that I want to touch on that cut across all these conversations, from information sharing, looking at machine learning, counter UAS. I'm glad you kind of touched on that. That's an issue we're looking at in other projects we're working on. And the physical cyber convergence issues, Jeanette, I know DHS has done a lot. I'd like to see what the private sector is thinking about that. But Joe, why don't you shed some light in terms of what you do?
So I work for Pacific Gas and Electric, and that serves about 8 to 9 million customers in northern and central California, natural gas and electric customers. If I think about our mission, it's to safely and reliably deliver our services, electricity and natural gas. Peel that back a little bit. How are we creating a security program to do that? At the end of the day, we're trying to make sure that everything runs smoothly. I guess the blue sky, everything's going well. But when something goes wrong, how do we ensure that it fails in a safe, reliable, or safe and predictable manner? So there are a few things that we're doing around that front. First, our program needs to be risk informed. We need to understand which assets are the most important assets. We need to understand how they're configured, how they're organized, everything under that realm. And our program needs to be threat informed. Do we understand what the threat actors are, what they're doing, what their methods and what their techniques are for attacking us or penetrating or causing some harm? I'll share 3 or 4 thoughts around the specific actions that we're taking. First, we took some action over the last 2 years to merge cybersecurity and physical security together. We feel that there's incredible value in bringing more and better situational awareness if we have those two parties talking to each other. And quite frankly, we believe any significant impact will be, and threat would happen through a cyber and physical means. They happen together, not isolated or not separate. So that's very important to us, and we're working now to figure out, okay, how do we, run an intelligence organization across both of those areas? That's an example. How do we do monitoring and response across both of those examples? Most people probably don't realize, but the large utilities run in-house intelligence organizations. If you think about that, it's pretty significant. They have people dedicated and focused on consuming information from all of our external partners, from individual sources, from vendors, and figuring out to disseminate or figure out how to ingest and then disseminate the relevant, important information about our assets. So merging cyber and physical, very important for us, and getting better situational awareness. Next area really was mentioned earlier, was around insider threat. We firmly believe that any significant impact to our operations would come from some form of an insider. Has to have an inside component. And that inside component could be malicious, as I think we've talked about, and we expect an outsider coming in and causing harm. Or it could be an accidental insider, where somebody's credentials or they have been impersonated or taken advantage of in some unwilling way. So we're building programs across the cyber and physical front to look for insider threat. And aspects of those programs really are increased monitoring. We're pulling from things that are already happening in the nuclear space around how to do behavioral observance. We're deploying technology to look for trends, those types of things. The last area I kind of wanted to touch on was, what was that last area I wanted to touch on? I knew this would happen. Situational awareness, very important. The last area is around detection and response and actually looking for problems. So you may hear terms around active threat hunting or red teaming. We're not sitting back and looking for and waiting for alarms and lights to go off. We're deploying additional technology to use artificial intelligence. We are hiring analysts to specifically go hunt and look for that needle in the haystack. Okay, take this intelligence that we have, now apply this and use different techniques and mimic techniques that we know our adversaries use all the time. We're bringing in third parties to do red teaming with us. We do things called near zero notice, no knowledge attacks. So it's kind of a capture the flag type activity where we'll tell somebody, okay, we want you to obtain X, Y, and Z targets. And you need to mimic maybe Russia's capability in this manner. How would you do that? Assign analysts that have no knowledge about our infrastructure and our assets, and do it when we don't have hardly any information about when they're going to be doing it. So they have that near zero knowledge, or near zero notice, so we don't really know what's going on there. I think those were the kind of the big touch points that I wanted to add to the conversation. I want to echo everything that's been said here about the partnerships. If I think back to 5 or 10 years ago when the state of security in the utility space, it has evolved and changed so significantly. And a lot of that is because we're willing to share a lot more, we're willing to work with each other, and we have incredible support from all of our government partners and our industry partners.
Thank you, Joe. Chris?
All right, thanks. Well, first of all, on behalf of Entergy, I'm very thankful to be part of this panel. It's a great collection of minds and players in this space that are challenged with securing the grid. So glad to be part of this panel. For the scholars out there, you need to think twice about getting into this space. In security, it's probably one of the only spaces where 99 is a failing grade. So keep that in mind as you look at this. But Entergy, if you were to take Duke, divide by 3, that's about our size. And it is a challenge to secure an ecosystem as large as what these gentlemen have described, especially in light of, last year was a tectonic shift. If you think about what happened, from a cyber threat perspective, you look at what happened to FedEx, Merck, Maersk on a global scale when NotPetya broke out. If you look at, this was more than, data being compromised. This was impact to operations, $1 million impacts to earnings statements. That's a shift in the threat, in the ability to take down a company's bottom line, just through malware. So, what do we do from a corporate perspective? There's 3 areas. One, cyber and physical risk is a board-level priority. We brief the board 5 times a year on how we're managing that threat, how effectively we're managing, where the gaps are, what we're doing right, and how we're performing as a company. And if you think about, the ecosystem of Entergy, you're looking at generation, fossil gas, you're looking at nuclear, you're looking at transmission, and then you've got the corporate. So that's a big space to secure. So, we're evolving on how we present our performance to the board, metrics, how we're performing from a regulatory perspective, what the investment looks like, how solid is our workforce. So all those factors go into briefing the board 5 times a year.
Chris, I can't believe I'm going to cut you off, but Brian and Joe, ballpark, same number of briefings to the board?
100%.
Absolutely, yeah. We meet
So 5 times a year, that's quite significant.
every time
That's
the
more
board
than,
meets, we have a conversation on security.
awesome, sorry, we actually have a survey coming out that we're doing with this month, some of those issues, so, sorry, Chris, go ahead,
And
please.
depending on what's happened in the previous quarter, it could be a short brief or it could be a little bit longer. So,
Short is good.
yeah. So the second thing is we manage cyber and physical, similar to Duke and PG&E. We manage it as an enterprise risk. So you have to look at it holistically. Look at it from the sub, all the way down to the AMI device in the home and figure out how to secure that end to end. And making sure that we're giving this risk the same priority that we give the storms. We know the devastating nature, Scott illustrated, that storms have on our system. Constant battle against, fire, floods, drought, ice, you name it. That's constant. We know that's there. And we have made a shift, a paradigm shift that the cyber and physical threat has to be treated as seriously as we do from a storm perspective. So we're making that investment and treating it from an enterprise perspective. And lastly, our approach is comprehensive. So it's capital investment, it's workforce investment, it's technology investment, it's governance, it's how do we communicate to the board, how do we communicate to the CEO and his staff, how do we change the culture? How do we combat phishing? How do we engage with our federal partners and leverage those assets as capabilities in our program? So it's a comprehensive approach. There's a lot of pieces to manage. If I were to use a football analogy, you look at Nick Saban. It's not just about 5-star athletes. It's about the training program. It's about managing alumni. It's about recruiting pipelines. It's about schemes and strategies. It's all that stuff integrated together. And the magic formula with Alabama is the integration of all those things into championship teams every year. That's how they do it. Every once in a while, even they get beat, and that happens. But from a cyber, if you think about it from a comprehensive perspective, you got to manage all those different facets in unison. It's got to be synchronized. It's got to be orchestrated and coordinated. And really, that's the secret sauce of protecting your data and your critical assets, is bringing to bear the full suite of your corporate assets, the money, the people, the technology, in addition to your partnerships, federal, and local to bear on protecting, those assets on a 24/7 basis.
Awesome, thank you, Chris. And I mean, not that it needs to be restated, but blocking and tackling really does matter in all of these various issues. And I think everyone's looking for that high-end, push the button, click, and you're done capability, and that's not the world we live in, sadly. But what I want to do is zero in on a bunch of themes that have been raised, and starting with the information sharing related issues. And obviously there are 16 designated critical infrastructures. Everyone has an ISAC. You have subsectors that have ISACs. And I'd be curious where we think the EISAC stands in terms of some of its information sharing initiatives. I'd also be curious, and Pat, I don't know if you mentioned CRISP, but you mentioned some of the information sharing initiatives there, where we see that fitting into some of these efforts. And more broadly, from an industry perspective, I'd be also curious. I mean, the reality is no company went into business thinking they're defending themselves against foreign intelligence services, whether it's from Russia, whether it's from China, whether it's from you name the country. Are you getting what you need from government? And if not, what more can be brought to bear? And then the flip side is the government has recently taken some strong steps in terms of, you all talked supply chain interdependency. Can the energy company, the utilities, tell me, kind of bluntly, Kaspersky, Huawei, ZTE, any products in your supply chain that we ought to be thinking about? So I'll start with Jeanette. So not on that question, but more just in general, the information sharing sorts of initiative. Where do we rack and stack? I spent a lot of time with the FSISAC. I spent a lot of time since they were picked on. I can say some good things. They're probably the gold standard in terms of some of the information sharing, but the EISAC is nipping at its heels, right?
Well, I would never presume to rack and stack the ISACs. That would get me in a lot of trouble.
Yep. I can.
I think, so I don't, my perception, I would defer to industry, but, it would seem to me that the electricity ISAC does a pretty good job. There's, between financial, electricity, ONG, aviation, the multi-state, healthcare maybe, I would say that they've probably got some of the most mature capabilities. They have people that sit on the NKIC floor, are sort of more routinely collaborating with us, but they're also the ones that I would say have some of the most significant risk as well. And they've also got a more, I don't want to say mature industry, but the industry has really decided that they're going to collaborate amongst themselves. I don't think an ISAC can be successful until they've got industry buy-in. Mm-hmm. And even we talked about the financial sector, and I think with the electric as well, and I've seen this with healthcare, until the industry at the top really sort of says we're committed to this information sharing, we're committed to sharing amongst ourselves, and we're committing to using this vehicle, the ISAC, to include resourcing it. Every sector is different in how they choose to do it. I think that those are some of the things that I've observed really need to happen. The ISAC can't just sort of take it amongst themselves without having that industry buy-in. We have we put together a grant to develop some information sharing and analysis organization, or ISAOs. But always seems to me like it sounds like an Apple pig. Get it? ISAO. Okay, we'll think about it. But the idea of really started to see a lot of organizations wanting to develop some sort of information sharing organization, whether that was an industry specific one or a regional one or local, and there was sort of this, well, what do I do? How do I do it? a lot of people would go to the financial sector ISAC and say, can you help me stand this up? And because people had this perception that they could help them do that. And so we worked with these standards, UTSA, University of Texas San Antonio, and they've put out some best practices and standards for how to develop these, and did it in coordination with the ISACs, both here's the things that we did well, here's the things that maybe we could have done better. And so we're interested to see how that starts to promulgate throughout the country. They're not standards, you're not audited against them in any way, but it's really sort of helping an organization or a group of organizations that want to kind of overcome some of these barriers to sharing. But to me, in the end, if you don't have the industry buy-in, the ISAC's not going to be successful.
So I'll just add to that with respect to the ISACs, the EISAC, the ONG ISAC, the DNG ISAC. We're trying to aggressively continue to build capabilities, and I think at the name of the game, it's what the capabilities that the ISACs have that make them valuable. When you look at the Electricity ISAC, they have a portal of information sharing that reaches out to all the utilities in the United States for those that participate in the portal. There's also, as Jeanette said, participation on the NCIC floor, but also the ability to work with NERC and do exercises. And the industry does a massive GridX exercise every other year, I believe. And that's a very strong exercise that the industry does in looking at its preparedness. Additional things from the ISAC's perspective of capability from a malware analysis, but also an incident analysis. One of the things that we partnered with the ISAC on was looking at a very well-defined analysis of the Ukraine event. And in partnership with the Idaho National Laboratory and the ISAC and NERC, we developed a training tool that went out to the industry to really take a hard look at that event and look at mitigation and understanding of what's happened there. And so those are capabilities and things that we're driving in partnership with how we can help support this industry and continue to build the industry. Another tool and capability that we've been working on and continuing to develop, which I know is probably greater than 75% of the customers covered, is under the CRIS program, which is the Cyber Risk Information Sharing Program. That program is a sensor-based information sharing threat analysis program, but it really pulls together the utilities on a common platform that we're able to do large-scale analysis and large-scale insights with respect to what is happening in the sector, which is extremely valuable with the collaboration in this sector, but also the unified front that we want to have in understanding the vulnerabilities, understanding the risk, understanding the threats facing this in this sector, but also the opportunities and how we can tackle problems holistically. And so with that, we will continue to develop some of these tools, especially in the OT environment, but we're really trying, once again, to advance the capability and capacity of industry to have better situational awareness and response capabilities.
Brian, you want to maybe take us, I mean, you mentioned security clearances, and that's not unique to your sector, I dare say. But what do you see some of the, and are you getting, because you've seen it sort of from both perches.
Yeah, I have.
How could that improve, or is it where it should be?
I think the ISAC is only going to be as strong as industry is willing to make it. You know, you're only going to get out of it what you're willing to put into it at this moment in time. And so the thought process from an industry perspective needs to be, we are going to invest in this. We think it is important. And oh, by the way, when bad things happen, we are in fact going to share. We're going to force ourselves to share this information so that when something is happening at Duke, Southern California Edison, Pacific Gas and Electric knows about it without the attribution, right? So there is value there, and we see that. The clearances, of course, I think that's a major part of it. We need to be able to have the conversation. But from an ISAC specific perspective, I think it's always going to be difficult to want to share information with your regulator. Look, that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We're not going to get away from that. Yep. However, I think the ISAC has moved the needle over the last number of years. Pat brought up GridX. So in 2011, we had 75 organizations participate in the NERC grid security exercise. This last year, we had over 450 organizations and over 6,000 people. Okay, we are moving the needle, and there is now less apprehension. People are kind of letting their hair down a little bit. Okay, I trust you, NERC. I trust what you guys are doing. This is a learning opportunity for us to all get better, and we see the value there. So I think the ISAC is getting a whole lot better. The struggle with not only electricity ISAC, but all ISACs is getting ahead of that CNN moment. If it's already on the news, then it's almost of no value, right? But if you're calling me minutes after a conversation that you just had with the FBI and DHS, and you're telling me, Brian, this is coming down the pike momentarily, that is of value, and that's where we need to gravitate towards.
Any other thoughts, Joe, Chris, on that in particular? And is government, and obviously Scott, doing enough in this space at this point in time?
I
In
think
terms of supporting?
It's constantly improving, and I think the more we put into it, like everybody has said, the more we'll get out of it.
Yeah.
The one aspect I would note here too, a little different, is we rely on informal information sharing too. So we talked a lot about programs up here, but we collaborate very well together, and amongst ourselves. If there is an issue, we will hear from our peers usually, some aspect, some way. There's a lot of value in the informal connections that we've been building over time too, and that's within our industry, with our partners, and outside of the industry.
So, Fred, I mean, in this particular space, there is no comparative competitive advantage necessarily. Is that kind of what I'm hearing, or obviously there's always some?
Well, I'm here. I think some of that is just about the duty to provide and duty to serve our customers. And,
Yeah.
and it's go back
In
to
the
the
end.
storms. We have mutual assistance programs around that. That's how we've always operated.
Mm-hmm.
We do the same type of things and have the capability to do the same things on the security front as well.
Absolutely. Chris, Scott, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I'll say two things. One, I think, our information sharing model in general needs to mature to match the threat. So we've got a gathering threat. There's a lot of, nation state, chatter out there. There's been a lot of reporting. So we need to mature that federal information sharing model to support the utility structure. I like the ISAC being the point on some of these major issues and threats, to have one single, entity that can coordinate across the industry, similar to the ESCC. I think there's a lot of value in that. But also, the ISAC is just one source of many that we use for threat information. We monitor over 25 different sources, some, formal, some informal, such as, a Twitter feed that someone monitors that we get information out of. But it's not the only source that we rely on for information sharing. It's got to be an augmented capability, but it does have to be effective, and it does have to mature to match the gathering threat that we're facing as an industry.
And Scott, one thing in particular, I know we've been in meetings together, cooperating with the defense industrial base, other critical infrastructures, whether it's ISAC or not, that are sharing similar. Because I mean, when I think of if everything's critical, nothing's critical. So let's talk lifeline sectors and how you work with some of those other sectors.
Fair enough. Yeah, true on that. So first of all, Jeanette, now I can't get this picture of a cute little pig in a really Spartan kind of white box with ice out on it.
I know, it's in my head too.
That is
It's like
fantastic.
a song.
So,
That it's not apples.
yeah, that's right. So I don't want to beat the dead horse. So yeah, I'm going to go where you went, Frank. A couple of thoughts here. So to beat the dead horse, it is all about trust. You get out of it what you put into it. And to talk about the EISAC specifically for just a second, the ESCC, something we haven't talked about a lot, is our CEOs, 32 of them, we get together 3 times a year. Actually just came back from Idaho National Labs with several of them. The phrase out of their mouth is cybersecurity is not an IT issue, it is a leadership issue. Yep. And the leadership that this industry at its highest levels and with the highest levels of government has shown, one of the things that we did was develop an initiative called the Members Executive Committee. And that is effectively a customer board of the EISAC. 2 CEOs helped to lead it, a bunch of subject matter experts at a very senior executive level. are a part of this members' executive committee, and they have been, again, a customer board to inform the EISAC. These are the things that you need to do to improve in order to make this a value proposition for the for my operators, for my cybersecurity experts. You know, no matter what we do, there's only 168 hours in a week, right? And I need a couple of them to sleep. So what am I going to use the rest of my time to do? And if I'm not getting value out of one of the many information sharing streams, well, then I'm not going to use it. But the EISAC is so important as a central sort of point of coordination because we are one big machine with thousands of owners and operators. And while EEI represents the investor-owned utilities, and there's 65 of us, there are 3,200 electric companies of cooperative and municipal and otherwise all across North America. So how do we make some of the information, not everybody is Duke or Entergy or PG&E. Not all of them have their own intelligence gathering capability. Yeah. Some of them really do rely solely on the EISAC. And because we are one big machine, we really do feel it is incumbent upon the industry to be able to take the really good work that the big companies are able to do, take the really good work that the other sectors, Frank, are doing, and make it germane to those entities that maybe don't have the capacity to develop their own intelligence or ingest lots and lots of data streams. And so I think that's really where you're seeing the EISAC and the industry going, is a evolution of, there's lots of good places to get information, and some of us are developing it ourselves, but what can we do to make this something that is a rising tide that lifts all the boats? And then one other thing about trust, you talked about Huawei and Kaspersky. I will go there real quickly.
I was going to let you guys slide on that, but I'm glad you're going there.
So I'm not an owner and operator, and I'm not the government. I can probably speak
but I
about
didn't
it most
mention
freely.
ZTE.
I love that the government put out its binding operational directive to its constituency, the federal government, just to let folks know that Kaspersky might be a problem. And well, what do you know? When you put that binding operational directive out there, we let the rest of the industry know, hey, DHS is doing this. You may want to think similarly. It's just that simple. Information sharing on that level has an impact. And then with respect to supply chain and CRISP, I'm going to draw a quick correlation here. I used the word trust. So it was probably about 5-6 years ago, we spent a summer negotiating a contract for the Cyber Risk Information Sharing Program that brought a national lab, the Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, NERC, the EISAC, and the industry together in a way that would allow the deployment of this really cool tool, these sensors on our networks that would develop information that could then be socialized across the rest of the industry. That was not an inconsequential task. We are doing something similar now with respect to supply chain, bringing companies, labs, large vendors, and the government together in a way that we can look at supply chain risk on industrial control systems, look at some of the equipment that is being developed in our supply chain, making sure it is secure, sharing information when it is not, but doing so not with non-disclosure agreements. God, that's the worst thing you can do for information sharing, but in controlled disclosure, in thoughtful disclosure, so that the vendors don't feel like they're being named and shamed, but they are actually providing a public service to the companies, and so that the companies don't feel like, well, I deployed something and now I've got liability because I deployed a thing that is insecure. Of course there are things we are deploying that are insecure. Again, millions of widgets make up the energy grid. You cannot protect all of them. We have nation states that are targeting certain components of it. What can we do to ensure the highest certainty is probably the wrong word, but at least the highest level of confidence that we are deploying secure components, and when they are not, we are taking action to remediate that as quickly as possible. It's not about stopping it all the time. You can't. There's no silver bullets. If there was, if there was one, I would have bought it by now. It's how do we adapt? Again, another sort of component of resilience as the threat continues to change, as the supply chain gets bigger and bigger and bigger. How do we put ourselves in a position to be as secure and prepared as possible?
Thank you, Scott. You raised a couple of points that I'm really glad you brought up. A, the labs and some of the capability that can be brought to bear there, and we've seen it in other environments. And if I'm not mistaken, NSTAC, the National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, is sort of looking at their moonshot sort of initiative, which I think historically the labs have played a significant role in similar sorts of efforts in our history. I'm going to turn it to the audience in a second, but I have one more sort of quick question. And I mean, AI, machine learning, where do we see automated indicator sharing? Where do we see that sort of racking and stacking? And again, it's sort of back to that lab sort of initiative. And then I'd be curious, what we saw play out in Ukraine, is that coming soon to a theater near you or not? What lessons should have been gleaned? What's different? And at the end of the day, I think it was a bit of an eye-opener, and I think the industry took it seriously, and I know government took it seriously. But what does that mean? I mean, is that sort of that test bed? Are they sort of the practice field before it comes elsewhere? It's sort of like the Iran's doing to Saudi Arabia and UAE, and the North Koreans are doing to the South. And I'd be curious what our thoughts are there, and would we handle it better, differently?
So I'm going to take the prerogative as
And go down the line, and then we're going to open it up to audience.
Well, as double A, I'm going to do what I'm used to doing, going first. I'm only going to talk. I'll talk really briefly about Ukraine, and then let the folks who are much smarter than me talk about automated indicator sharing and some of the machine-to-machine capabilities that are probably on the horizon. Ukraine was my favorite kind of attack because it happened to somebody else, and we get to learn from it. I mean, just to be really
learn
frank,
from someone else's mistake.
that's, you know, and, you know, you said, Frank, that it was an eye-opener. I'm not sure it was. I think we kind of knew that that was something that was, that could happen. But it was really interesting to see sort of this is what the, this is sort of what the structure of an attack might look like, right? This is fairly sophisticated. We've got, you know, spear phishing. We've got a nation state. We've got sort of, they're trying to execute diplomatic control. That was, I think, sort of a fascinating example of what one of these will look like. So what did we learn? So talk about the Sector Coordinating Council again. This was at the end of 2015. We had just come out of GridX 3 at the time. So November of 2015, GridX 3, December of 2015, Ukraine gets hit. January of 2016, a bunch of CEOs get together for the ESCC meeting and look at folks like me and the folks up here, say, so do we have the surge capacity to deal with an attack like that here in North America? The answer at that point was sort of. And that is a really bad answer for chief executives. So they gave us a directive to go and develop a capability to have a surge capacity to respond to an incident like that. And this goes to the example of CEOs being great leaders in this regard. You know, I joke with the CEOs all the time. They're not the ones who do the work, but they create accountability, they set priorities, they provide resources, they're a draw to other senior executives, and when they say something's gonna get done, it's amazing how quickly it can get done. So just to run through the timeline, January of 2016, they look at us and say, what are we gonna do for surge capacity? You've heard it a little bit. We have a culture of mutual assistance in this industry. We work really well together in storms to go restore, but also to work under blue skies to prepare for those eventualities. Well, what if we had a cyber mutual assistance capability? And today we do. The first part of 2016, we took a little bit of time to develop one. I actually remember going to those meetings. There were 3 of them in the first quarter, wondering if I'd get in a room with folks like Chris, Joe, and Brian, and they'd say, oh, no, we don't need something like that. It's not going to work. Every one of them to a person, yes, this is a good idea. It's not going to be bucket trucks rolling down the road with, with cyber experts in it. That's not what we're doing. But how do we create a center of gravity where we can help each other in times of need? And so in that short period of time, we went from concept and agreement to developing a playbook, to developing a legal construct, again, trust. This does have a non-disclosure agreement. You get into the room together, and you know you are in a circle of trust. You can open the kimono as far as you need to because your colleagues are there to help you in your time of need. We have exercised it, we have utilized it, and today we have more than 145 companies from all across North America who are members of the Cyber Mutual Assistance Program. And they represent more than 80% of, they serve more than 80% of customers all across North America. Think about that. Inside of 2 years, industry started a brand spanking new program to have surge capacity for a cyber mutual assistance event. You know, I can't think of any battleship that can turn around that quickly. I'm sorry, any aircraft carrier, sorry, Brian, any aircraft carrier that can turn around that quickly, but we have. And the last thing I'll say about CMA is it's not an end state. Just like traditional mutual assistance, which has been around for about 100 years, it is, and has been formed in the crucible of response to natural disasters over the last century, cyber mutual assistance will be exactly the same. We will continue, it's sort of the Christmas tree that we will continue to layer ornaments on top of so that we have the capability to adapt to an ever-changing threat landscape. So just a quick example of how Ukraine informed industry policy.
Anyone else want to jump on that and some of the technology-enabled solutions? And then if I can ask this be a bit of a lightning round so we can get to audience questions. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think if we're going to have the ability to look around the corner, we need to be able to leverage new and emerging technologies, the AI, the sticks to taxi. I mean, we're not there yet as an industry. We need to get there because we need to have advanced capabilities. So that's something we need to look at. And to your question, you know, couldn't a Ukraine event happen? You know, anything's possible. You know, you always, you know, things like this always happen where you're not looking, so you got to be prepared. You know, we've talked a lot about that. It's all about, you know, having the comprehensive, you know, national level response capabilities, the internal response, and the capabilities to respond to any type of threat, whether it's a Ukraine type or a simple phishing event. I mean, those capabilities have to be in place. But.
Joe?
Just, I guess, a real quick thought is, you know, that whole idea of resilience comes up, and I think one thing that would help us in regards to a similar Utane type of attack is that you know, our grid is made up of many different owners and operators with a whole bunch of different technology that's been implemented over a long period of time. That is a lot of diversity, and that diversity in itself provides some sort of help from an attack, a coordinated attack. You have to understand a lot more of that complex moving part, that big machine that's out there in order to cause severe long-term outages or impacts. And I also think it's important that not only do we invest in all of the new technology to prevent, detect, and respond, but also let's put our focus on making, like I think Brian mentioned, our critical assets less critical. Mm-hmm. You know, let's invest in building additional substations or more capacity in certain areas so that when you lose one, you know, issue, one item, one asset, you're not putting the whole thing at risk.
It's a single point failure, vulnerability analysis assessments. That's actually a good point for both physical and cyber.
And with respect to Ukraine, just really quick, I think, and as to whether or not it can happen here, I think the intent is probably there, but the impact would be dramatically different. I'll quickly say that there is no utility in this room right now that is running pirated versions of Windows XP on their system. I'm going to say that.
That's a... Pat.
My one statement that I want to add to the conversation is around machine learning and new capabilities.
In the labs, I'm not going to let you go because I think they bring some unique capability.
There is a huge opportunity to take advantage of machine learning moving forward in the utility environment, not only from asset management to better operations and improved efficiencies to cybersecurity and physical security and all of the above as we look at the approach. So I think there is a huge opportunity to continue to develop tools, information, data that can be fed into a machine learning environment that would provide value.
So as far as Ukraine, I don't think I have too much to add other than the sort of, I think it was March, we put out a product about Russian targeting of critical infrastructure. That product, and this is public, you'll read it on our website, that product represented some significant work between the intelligence community, the private sector, the Department of Energy, DHS, FBI, all coming together to identify a threat, work with industry to identify where it might have gone. Note that pretty much industry stopped them, and get together to figure out how do we ensure that the Russians can't achieve whatever their objectives might be, and then alert the broader public about it. So those are the types of it. That represents the maturity of our partnership, that represents the maturity of the government, I think, in moving towards declassifying more information, sharing information, partnering with industry. It also represents, frankly, the trust that industry had in, it was broader than energy, but a fair amount of it was within energy, with the Department of Energy, with our department, allowing us into their systems to see what was really going on and being able to identify information that we could not fully understand through just government information collection. So those, because we've built those mechanisms, they're not perfect. We have to continue to build them, but because we've built them, we can, I believe, continue to ensure that any actor who is attempting to infiltrate our systems can be stopped before they are able to have consequences. On AIS, very briefly, I would say generally automation and orchestration is where we need to be pushing. We have too many analysts who are doing the work of computers. We need to have the computers doing that work, and we need to have our analysts doing the things that humans are good at. And so AIS is only one small part of that. And there's some work we're going to be doing to improve the automation of the indicator sharing over the next couple of months based off of feedback with industry and our government partners, and of course the evolution of the STIX taxi standard. But we're also working on things with integrated adaptive cyber defense, so specifications. How do we actually start to have all of these amazing tools that have become available to cyber defenders? How do we ensure that they can orchestrate together? So that you're not trying to manage 70 different tools, and how do we then create some common interoperability across organizations? It gets back to that alerting and warning, so that we're all looking at the same things in similar ways.
Awesome. And just in the, for what it's worth, I'm not going to opine much, which is rare for me, but I mean, in the, for what it's worth, the fact that DHS is leaning forward on this is pretty cool. So it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be just right. But these are the sorts of initiatives that I in the for what it's worth category, I think ought to be nurtured, because very easy to go wrong. But the truth is that's the future. So I had question Paul, then Lynn, then up here. All right, we got a lot of questions. A short amount of time. If I can ask you to A, identify yourself, B, who your questions aimed at, and C, if we can make them brief. So Paul, we'll start with you, then Lynn, then here, then here. So, and I'm just seeing the first row, and there. Okay, Paul. And please identify
Thanks, Frank,
yourselves.
and a great panel. My question is for the three
You got to identify yourself. You're already failing, Paul.
Long ago, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and America's Security Affairs.
And one of our board members. So
And
thank you.
proud to be a board member. My question is for the three industry panelists. We have to assume that for each of your companies, Russia or other potential adversaries are seeking to corrupt the protection relays, SCADA software, and other critical assets that you have. Fortunately for Russia or other potential adversaries, only a small number of providers, vendors are out there, but you three companies have enormous potential market power in saying to vendors, we're only going to buy stuff that's been carefully certified. How can you build a business case to add to the terrific initiatives that are already underway by the folks on the panel?
Good question. That gets to a smoother way of my question.
Well, I think we could start with, I know there's a new NERC standard coming out around supply chain security. I think we intend to leverage that, you know, not just from a grid perspective, but, you know, we can leverage that across the company. So we're using, you know, the standard as grid, and we're going to expand it from a corporate perspective. But I think there'll be a lot of opportunity to leverage, you know, a unified approach to, you know, holding vendors' feet to the fire to make sure we're getting secure products when we insert them into the enterprise. So I see a lot of that on the horizon. I think that standard is going to drive a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think we're doing some work right now, piloting some options and possibilities with the national labs, with our peers, and with some of those big vendors. What would this look like? What would the structures, what hurdles would have to be overcome in order to put certification in place or to have, better confidence in the supply chain?
So vendors and consultants love to meet with Duke Energy. Almost on a daily basis, or at least I'm pinged. Hey, could you meet? And I have said routinely, if you want my business, this is what I need. And if you're not willing to give it to me, then I'm going to go elsewhere. And so that is my opinion. I think we're able to utilize and kind of throw our weight around just a little bit, if I'm being completely frank. So that's kind of been our approach. I agree with Chris. The SIP 13 standard that's coming down the pike is going to be big for us. It's going to infuse language into a lot of our procurement processes that is going to ensure that protections are put in place.
Awesome. Glenn.
Len Mattice, I'm a senior fellow here at GW. This is a question for Brian. Now that you've walked a mile in the moccasins of a regulated, what would you recommend to the regulators to do differently?
I kind of knew that was coming my way, and I really want to tap dance around it just a little bit. Not really, because we're all family in here, right? But I have come to the realization now that I'm here on the utility side that my whole world doesn't revolve around regulation. As I mentioned to Pat earlier, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I'm trying to keep the lights on and keeping people out of my system, and that dominates my day. And, oh, by the way, I have this other regulatory regime that I have to deal with as well, whether it's MTSA, whether it's DHS CFATS, whether it's NERC CIP, which is a big, big deal. And I am fully cognizant of the impact of regulation. NERC CIP has the potential for $1 million per day per fine. That's a big dang deal, and I'm cognizant of it. But at the same time, I need to be beholden to my clients and my customers to ensure that when they flip on the switch, the lights come on. And that is priority number one. And everything else is a distant second.
Got a question here, and just wait for the mic, and we'll try to get through as many as we can.
Hi, Sean Lingus with Cyberscoop, reporter, so beware. My question is on vulnerability disclosure, where mostly for the utility executives on the panel, where you get your threat information. Obviously, you have in-house intelligence organizations, as you alluded to, but there's a lot of moving parts in the government to provide you with information. I'm wondering if you need more of a one-stop shop for that. Probably you go to ICS CERT. DOE has CRISP. Is it too confusing about where to get threat intelligence? And secondly, maybe for Jeanette, you've said before that there needs to be a little more coordination in the vulnerability disclosure process. I mean, there's all these security researchers out there who sometimes are posting what they find, and maybe the government would like more of a heads up on that. What tangible steps can be done to improve that?
So I guess I'll take a stab at the information sharing or intelligence. So we get our intelligence from open source intel. We'll get our intelligence from paid third-party providers. We get intelligence from our peers and peer groups, and we get intelligence from from the government. Maybe it would be nice if there were a more consolidated way to get intelligence from a single point in the government. But in some regards, I like the diversity of getting it from different areas, because that diversity, in my mind, is just everybody has their own secret sauce, whether it's a vendor and a way they think about security or intelligence or a government partner. And at the end of the day, I want more eyes, more secret sauce to apply to my environment so I can understand what the risks are and take action accordingly.
So our data streams are coming from a multitude of different places. We mentioned the ISAC, US CERT, ICS CERT, Wayland, who's in the room, a number of third-party vendors. But it tends to also move into what I call bronet. I know you, I have a relationship with you, and we go back and forth, right? I can tell you definitively, because I'm friends with Chris, that we have a relationship and a texting relationship back and forth once a week where, hey, what are you doing about this? And we say, okay, well, this is what I'm doing about it. What are you doing about it? And then we're kind of going back and forth. We're doing kind of the informal benchmarking. So if he's hearing something, presumably I know about it and vice versa. So those are important relationships to have in place under blue sky prior to events.
The only thing I'll add is I like Cyberscoop. It's one of my intel sources. So keep up the good work.
Do you want to?
Sure. There we go. Let's see. So on vulnerability disclosure, I mean, we could talk for a long time about vulnerability disclosure and the challenges around that. I would say sort of similar to what we're talking about with threat intelligence. I mean, we have multiple feeds. It is a bit of a crowdsourcing, right? The internet is a global thing. You got a lot of people looking at different parts of it, and so you want to have a lot of different eyes on it. It's sort of the same with the burgeoning industry of security research, and we benefit from so many people becoming interested in finding these vulnerabilities and looking at them from different perspectives. At the same time, you know, it used to be when you had a very small community looking at it, or it was all sort of in-house, it was sort of easier to coordinate the release of the patch with the release, the disclosure of the vulnerability. That's becoming more and more challenging, and I think can become dangerous when you have organizations or individuals that are disclosing vulnerabilities that don't have a patch associated with them, or are, you know, very, very significant and potentially unmitigatable for the long term, and kind of a corollary to that, incredibly complicated, which we've also seen recently, and people have a hard time sort of understanding what the impact are, and so you have everybody thinking they got to go throw out their computers, and so it's in the past, and we still do this, but you know, DHS has been sort of a middleman, and particularly for if you had a researcher that didn't feel like they were getting any play with the company that owned the software, and they didn't think anybody was listening to them, and so we would often help them work with the company, get some attention with that company. Now that's not so much of a case. Every major company has disclosure policies and often have rewards, which, again, that's a separate issue about whether that's a good or bad incentive. So what we'd like to see is, you know, coordinated disclosure, and how can we mature some of the processes that some of the big tech companies have, and how do we apply those more broadly while not losing the benefit from so many different eyes on all of these different devices and applications. The NTIA has been working, and I think they've published a sort of a coordinated vulnerability disclosure best practices. We've done some work in this place, and so tangible steps. I think a lot of it is just sort of getting out there, talking, helping researchers understand that the damage that could potentially being done through an uncoordinated disclosure, and encouraging that sort of participation in that coordinated vulnerability disclosure regime. But I don't have any intention of telling people how to do it, and so I think it's just kind of continued awareness and helping people understand the impacts of it.
Thank you, Jeanette. And just to underscore one issue on intelligence writ large, I mean, all things said and done, it's not to slay a myth here, but it's an ugly process. And informal often trumps formal, and we're very good when we've got an adversary in our sights, not so good when we're providing indication and warning, because ultimately it is these informal networks that sometimes, I think it can be a gal net as much as a bro net, and I'm glad we got two gals here representing these departments and agencies, but the truth is that's the way it works in the traditional space too, not just the cyberspace. All right, we got time for, who has questions here? Here, there, and then we're going to go back to the woman all the way in the back. So that's probably going to be it. So quick questions.
Hi, Mark Peters with MITRE. This is a question for the private sector participants, and particularly you, Brian. If you could ask for one product from the intelligence community that you could not get from your private sector partners, what would the title of that product be, and how would you be seeking to use it?
Am I adding to your business model right now?
I'm 501c3 charity.
I don't know if I know the answer right this very second, other than to say that anything that you can help us get in front of, that CNN moment. And I know that's not very helpful, but I'm very good at watching the news unfold before my eyes in my operations center. And at that point in time, I'm just as smart as everyone else is. But if I knew about that information 5 days ago, I could mitigate it before it hit the news. And I had my talking points together to say, we knew it. We've worked with DOE. We worked with DHS. We mitigated it. This is the public-private partnership in action. There's a success story, and we can tout that. That's a big deal for us. From a product perspective, I don't know if I'm prepared to answer that just yet, but anything that you're able to help us get ahead of those crisis moments.
Anyone else want to jump into that? So we had here, there. So, please.
Andrew Hirsch, Jardine Lloyd Thompson Group, Senior Fellow with GW. Going back to the supply chain question, going a little bit deeper, how well on the private side do you guys engage your procurement folks, your enterprise risk management folks, and how will you actually enact and monitor and secure the vendors as they supply? How do you enact that monitoring and control?
Well, I'll just suggest that it's kind of like Missouri. It's the show me state, right? And I kind of utilize that same thought process. Don't tell me that you're secure, show me. And if I'm going to have a relationship with you, you need to be able to prove that everything that you're doing on the back side is protecting my data, whether it's through cyber or physical means. You can have the best cybersecurity in the world, and I can walk right into your facility. That's a problem for me. And so I guess that's my short answer is trying to verify the things that you're saying through the procurement process.
Yeah, so we have a program in place right now. So we use, if you're a vendor that's going to, host or transmit sensitive data, we're going to look at, we're going to use some tools to look at your security posture. Security scorecard is one of those tools that you can get a general sense just by, using that tool to determine how, secure a company is, just from an external perspective, what their reputation is, what their patching cadence is. So we get a good perspective there on the level of risk we're taking if we were to contract with that vendor. We've got contract language around, security expectations. And, we're in a constant state of maturity around that model to really tighten up that process. But it is an area, it's an emerging area that needs a lot of attention and focus, but we've already started to look at that risk.
I just want to add something really quickly. In the supply chain community, we have to start thinking about maybe like an ISO 9000 standard, where you're talking about a quality control standard, but a continuous improvement standard. Mm-hmm. So you take something like the maturity model process, and you apply it to the supply chain community so that they can continue to grow in maturity. Whether you're looking at defects or flaws in a physical device, from the quality control point of view, we need to do the same thing from a software point of view. And so we need to have some sort of way that we can develop that quality control, but a continuous improvement process.
Actually, that's an interesting point. Would there be receptivity for sort of a test bed? Because I know when we're thinking about supply chain, you also can't help but think of IoT or IOE or anything and everything else. But the reality is it's these interdependencies. Would industry potentially, and I'm not putting you on the spot here for a particular project, but would there be receptivity for sort of a test bed that would enable some of this, industry to industry and industry to government?
Well, I can say that we're doing it in the government.
There we go.
With actually a partnership with Energy and others. Eventually, we'd like to get it to where it's something that can be used by industry as well.
Awesome.
So we're not all investing in the same thing.
That's taking advantage of limited, we had a question here, then I was going there, and then I was going to the back, so.
Alan Stoddard with Verint. You spoke about intelligence gathering on the physical side. We're seeing biometrics becoming a bigger part of different elements. With GDPR and state agencies and regulatory issues coming up, how do you see the potential impact of privacy and data privacy kind of impacting what you're trying to do on the security side, both cyber and physical, And are there challenges there that we're going to need to work through as data privacy becomes a bigger part of our environment?
I would say just very briefly, I think there's probably even already a conflict between enterprise security and data privacy that we're going to have to figure out how do we resolve that. And I don't want to say conflict as if it's a bad thing, but there is equities that we have to balance. We already have to balance some of that because as we encrypt more and more data, your traditional network security capabilities are less capable because they can't see what they used to be able to see. We think that there's ways to change that paradigm, but it does require changing the types of enterprise security sort of model that you have, particularly at the network level. So I think, and when we've talked with European countries and sort of our counterparts, CERTs and others, there's, really, they're going to have to spend a lot of time, and we'll have to as well, because many of our companies will be subject to that, thinking about, as GDPR defines privacy data, it is often data that is integral to our enterprise security capabilities. So how do we do that? We also want to think about the information sharing and whether or not that will have some impact. So I think it's a really important conversation to have. Where does an employee have rights to privacy versus the need to secure the organization? I think that's something that we have to really sort of think through and figure out.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? We had a question over here, and then there, and then we'll try to get to some of the others.
Hi, I'm Michael Garcia. I'm with the National Governors Association. It's been a fantastic conversation, and one thing that I'm struck by is that we kind of only mentioned it a little bit, but really talk about the state role, because when an incident occurs, whether it's man-made or natural, and if it's going to be cross-boundary, where most likely not it will be, states are going to be the ones that are responding with their local counterparts. And Scott, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that the CEOs came back and said that it's not an IT issue, it's a leadership issue. We're about to face a huge leadership challenge because in November of this year, we have 38 gubernatorial elections with at least 19 new governors coming into office in 2019 and probably more. What that even means also is that we have more CIOs coming in, more CISOs, more Homeland Security advisors. You have this whole change of government coming in 2019. So I'm very curious as to, and this is really for the industry folks on the panel, but really for all of y'all, what's your approach to engaging these new administrations, these new people, and making sure that they're informed? Because there's a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation, but there's a lot of information out there as to what the threat really is, what to actually do, and then notions as to what industry is doing or not doing. So curious to hear your thoughts on that.
And should there be a particular initiative along the lines, I mean, GridX on an exercise side, but to get new governors and their chief principal officers responsible for these issues smart on these issues? Should there be, NGA sounds like they'd be positioned well to do that, actually, but.
So the short answer to Frank is yes. And then
And
Michael,
yes.
Right, and then Michael, first of all, thanks for the question. I think a couple things. One of your CIOs, one of your state CIOs said to me about 5 years ago, states are the consequence people. When there's something that happens, right, man-made or natural, where the rubber hits the road tends to be at the state level, and people look to state emergency operations centers, governors, et cetera. So that is not lost on us. We've got great relationships with state EOCs, especially after years and years of storm response, but kind of extrapolating that experience and making it relevant to critical infrastructure protection, cyber, physical security issues is a bit of a challenge, especially with the turnover. So I think that's where organizations like yours, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, the National Association of State Energy Officials, all the N organizations, right, that bring together and kind of are the center of gravity and hold that information for long term, I think are incredibly important. So we've been proud to start to partner with you at the Sector Coordinating Council level to kind of develop that relationship and see what sorts of things we can do. Second thing I'd say is, there are some really good things happening in the states, right? I don't want to call out any particular states because I'll feel like I'll miss a few, but I know there are some National Guard, state adjutant generals that are doing some really, really good things with their local critical infrastructure providers. 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, these people go and do their day jobs and bring that to the Guard, and vice versa. They take what they're doing at the Guard and bring it back to their day jobs. I think that's a really nice cross-pollination across a lot of sectors and good connectivity between critical infrastructure providers and the government. So I think finding those best cases and those best-in-class kind of initiatives and socializing those so that other states are doing the same thing, and then again working with the national associations to be a repository of information that can make sure we don't lose too much when 19 plus governors are turning over in any given election year.
Brian, Joe, Chris, anything you want to?
Yeah, I would mostly just echo that. I mean, I think the relationships and the partnerships with the states are incredibly valuable. We're very tightly integrated with the governor's office in California and the Cal OES. Every time we do our annual exercise, cyber-physical kind of exercise, we have a group of external participants from across the industry, across governments, across the state to participate with us so we can learn how to coordinate and interact a little bit better than we do today.
Just a real-world example, I guess. I won't go into too much detail about what the scenario was, but we recently went through an exercise where we had something blow up and it impacted an interstate that ran through North Carolina. And so working with the Office of Emergency Management and the governor's office to try and walk through some of those issues was very eye-opening to them as to what capabilities that we had and what we brought to the table and how we were able to augment the things that they were doing, and vice versa. So having that relationship now, I think, is key. We want to engage early and often, and I think we have.
The only thing that I want to add to it is we have a strong partnership with NASIO and NARUC in developing cybersecurity toolkits as well as energy assurance plans. And so as new folks come on board, they should capitalize on some of the existing tools and capabilities that are already available. And we can always coordinate with folks to make sure that they understand that there is a plethora of information to really pull from that will get people up to speed quickly. In addition to, I would advocate anybody coming in, participate in exercise as soon as possible to get those relationships and get that experience going.
If I could just add one different take on it. I think I talked about this in the beginning, and I think in a lot of situations, right, when you have sort of a disaster, whether or not it's caused by a cyber sort of scenario, you're worried about public health and safety. You're worried about sort of the traditional emergency management consequences. But then you can picture scenarios where there's a continued compromise of a system that is going to continue to cause harm. So now your sort of cyber issue is equally important to resolve. Who's responsible for doing that? How does that integrate into the traditional emergency management community? There's also scenarios where there's no physical impact, but we have a really significant incident going on. Is it the responsibility of the governor where that company's headquartered, if it's a multinational company? I don't think so. But what is the role of state and local governments if that is having an impact in all of state and local? Say something that's a broad service that's provided through multiple states. So I think our existing national response framework and sort of emergency management doctrine that's been really developed and promulgated throughout the country, now well understood, can capture much of what we need to do from a cyber perspective. I think a lot of it is just about how do we integrate those components into that. Your IT operations security folks don't know what ICS, incident command structure. They're not going to know what that is. They don't know how to plug into that. So part of it is thinking about how do we get those folks trained into plugging into what those sort of structures are. But then there's gaps. It's not considered under our existing emergency management concepts that cyber is unique. So how do we define where those are unique, and then how do we have very clear expectations? The governors have, routinely, when we meet with Council of Governors, when we meet with Homeland Security advisors, this is the number one thing that they continually say. This is a gap for us. We need to figure out what are the expectations, how do we ensure that between federal government, state and local, that we all know what each other are doing, and what's the role of private industry. And so this is a huge priority for us, huge priority for state and locals, and I think probably regardless of which administration is in the state, it'll be a priority for theirs. But I think we have some work to do at the national level to define this more clearly. And I'll plug your work for you at the National Governors Association, the Cyber Policy Academies, and others where we're trying to work through this at the state level. So I think that we've got work to do, but we've kind of got everybody together working it.
Those are some great points, and just from a outsider's perspective and not an empirical perspective, but the NPPD FEMA lash-up is much stronger. I mean, it's anecdotal, but every time I'm speaking to something, they're actually doing a lot of the crosswalk there. So we've got the last question here, woman in blue.
Thanks. Melissa Hirsch, risk consultant, ASU faculty and research associate. This is for the private sector panel. One, my esteemed audience members have already asked the supply chain questions I wanted to ask, so that's great. But in terms of modernization, procurement, and digitization, I wanted to know your sentiments on whether or not you wanted to stay analog, and if that's something with respect to ICS systems you're really considering, and a lot of different things. And then just two other issues. One is, you guys are doing some excellent work with respect to the mutual assistance. How much of this is being socialized outside of like-minded groups like this in terms of sort of trying to develop a narrative so that you can counter some disinformation related to potential interruptions and disruptions? And this is something maybe more offline for Duke, but I'd be interested in understanding about the cyber physical payloads and the challenges you're facing and ConOps related to the counter-unmanned systems, and whether that's the private industry folks doing it or if you're training up local law enforcement. Thanks.
That is a lot of questions, but I do want to touch on the cyber active measures issue if we can get to that, but industry, who wants to jump in?
I'll start
first?
with the digitization, and Scott Aaronson has mentioned this in the past. He and I have spoken at length at different organizations on this in the past, and that is, we are moving into the next century. We are very digital. We are very forward-leaning, but at the same time, I think we're also thinking hard about how we operated back in 1980, and having the ability to also do things manually. So when we don't have that technology at our fingertips, because for whatever reason it's not working, we still have the ability to move those levers and move power from point A to point B.
Which was a takeaway in Ukraine, right?
Indeed.
It was.
Indeed. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott if you don't mind, but I know that that's kind of what the industry is wrestling with right now. Is we want to champion technology, but we also see the value of the manual aspect.
So it's a great question. It's a loaded question. We don't have nearly enough time to talk about it, and I apologize for that. I will be as brief as I can. Back to that analogy of, or not the analogy, the anecdote of the CEO saying, can we operate, or do we have the surge capacity? Well, sort of. Can we operate in a degraded state? Can we operate manually? The answer to that is still sort of. And so we also are working to develop the capability to operate without this digital overlay. And we're not completely there yet, but all of these companies use sort of the PACE model of primary, alternate, contingent, emergency. And that emergency backup, we operated the grid for the better part of the 20th century without a digital overlay. Several CISOs were in with a large manufacturer that will remain nameless, and they were terrific. Like, we're going to be the industrial internet, we're going to digitize everything, all these efficiencies, it's going to be great. And the CISOs raised their hand and said, can we operate manually? What about that ability to not have that digital overlay? And this manufacturer, to their credit, said, you want that? So it's as simple as actually starting to develop, or actually developing again, the supply chain and capacity to operate, when we've taken that punch in the mouth. It is We're not there yet, but, and it might not be pretty, it might not be efficient, we might not be billing customers at the time, but if we're talking about our obligation to national security, I think having that contingent and emergency planning done today is going to serve us well. And that is, again, as Frank mentioned, that is a lesson that we learned out of Ukraine as well. Look, 225,000 people lost power for 6 hours. It's a bad day in Ukraine, but it's not catastrophic to national security because they were able to get the power back up and running. Again, not in a pretty way, but what kinds of things can we be doing today here in the United States to execute that? I'll wait a second and see how you want to talk about the cyber app measures.
Two things. One, I got to push back on Ukraine because I think that was intended to send a message more than be the because they wouldn't have followed up with a digital telephony denial of service attack if it was really meant to be a hostile attack. But that's a different conversation, different place. But on cyber active measures or disinformation, is that something we ought to be worrying about in the event of a crisis? This was always an issue with pandemics and natural disasters historically, but just do we need to start thinking about hostile foreign nations potentially manipulating this?
Yes, and we are.
And have you seen anything that you can discuss or no?
We have. I don't want to name names, but we've seen it in a lot of different places. So we have seen market manipulation. There are countries who don't like the fact that we can export gas or want to export gas. And so they are certainly working with either their little bots and sowing that kind of disinformation in areas where trying to kind of generate some perceived opposition to pipelines and things like that. My biggest fear coming out of the 2017 hurricane season is disinformation that puts people's lives at risk. Yep. Taking a bad situation and sowing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or the flip side, taking a really bad situation and underplaying it. Again, putting people's lives at risk. So we have been working most recently with some of the social media providers and talking to them about what their capabilities are, becoming a trusted voice. Think the emergency broadcast system, right? When that thing comes up on your TV and makes that horrible high-pitched noise, you pay attention. What is that in the digital age? And can we socialize that to the American people so that they know when they hear from a particular voice that what they are hearing is trustworthy and again gives us an opportunity to communicate with them under duress in a way that allows us to get information to them that we think will help them protect themselves in the event of a really catastrophic incident. So this is a really big deal. It doesn't just apply to elections. It doesn't just apply to manipulation of markets. This is something that we need to be thinking about as a nation so that for public safety and so that our citizens can be prepared.
Scott, that is a sobering but awesome way to close the conversation. I did succeed in one thing, getting us out exactly on time. But before I let everyone escape, please join me. I mean, this could have gone on for days. Awesome panel. Let me also especially single out Brian. Thank you for pushing us on this. I'm really happy you pursued that, and thank you to Matthew and Tiffany on my team for getting all of this done. So thank you. Have a great Friday.